Okay, so we'll pick up with D-Day and then the Battle of the Bulge in 1944. As the Soviets were pushing from the east, the Germans were retreating back towards Berlin there. But in the west, when the Allies landed at Normandy and Utah Beach and Omaha Beach and whatnot for D-Day, they began pushing through France and pushing back towards Germany from the west as well. A couple of the things, D-Day, there's tons of stories, and it's, a legendary kind of Allied invasion, and, something like 10,000 planes dropping paratroopers behind the lines to draw the Nazis away from the coast, and then something like 10,000 ships landing on the coast of France, bringing the supplies and the tanks and opening up the port city so that they could kind of get the heavy guns in so that they could push back against the Nazis. So it was a pretty amazing invasion in the sense that um, it's very difficult to invade an enemy who has a fortified coastline, and to do it, it took a lot of planning. It took a ton of risk, and obviously the Allies knew they were going to lose a lot of soldiers trying to get it done. They were helped infinitely, well, not infinitely, but they were helped quite a bit by the fact that the Nazis had to split their forces, and many of their forces were in the east fighting against the Soviets. So if Hitler had kind of stuck by the non-aggression pact, there was probably no way that the Allies could have invaded Europe at Normandy. But since he divided his soldiers, it kind of put him in a difficult situation. The last big battle before the Allies were kind of able to really push towards Germany was the Battle of the Bulge, which took place in late 1944, early 1945. This was a brutal winter battle between the Allied forces of the United States and Britain against the Nazis, and really it was a good back and forth for a long period of time, and the Nazis actually had the advantage for a lot of it. What happened though was that the Nazi Panzer tanks, their marquee tanks, eventually ran out of gas on the battlefield, and so what happened to the Nazis was that they literally ran out of the fuel that they needed to kind of fight the battle, and eventually the Allies were able, because of better supplies and the ability to kind of keep their war machine going, were able to prevail at the Battle of the Bulge. And then after that, the race was sort of on towards Germany. One thing I do want you to know is, we've talked a lot about the Russians always wanting warm water ports. One of the limitations that the Germans seem to always have is enough fossil fuels to kind of fuel their war machine. And that is a problem throughout. And so if you look back at breaking the non-aggression pact, one of the other problems with it was that the Nazis had a pretty good agreement with the Soviets to buy oil, from the Baku region, and other fuel to kind of keep their war machine going. But once they took on the Soviets, that source of fossil fuels actually went away. And now, obviously, the Nazis probably were thinking, if we could take over Russia, or at that time the Soviet Union, then the fossil fuels would be ours for the having. But by taking on the Soviet Union, they lost that source. So the tanks ran out of gas at the Battle of the Bulge, and then it was sort of on towards Germany for the Allies. The race to Germany, was between the Soviet Union and the Allied forces, U.S. and Britain. And the idea was that whoever got to Germany first was probably going to get to hold it. It just so happens that both the Allies and the Soviets made it to Germany around the same time, and it just so happens that Germany was split up after World War II into East and West Germany. And so what you need to understand about the Cold War beginning to take shape in 1945 is that all the countries that the U.S. And Britain invaded ended up becoming democratic capitalist leaning countries, and all the countries that the Soviet Union ended up taking ended up becoming communist states that were protected by the Soviet Union. So the Cold War is really about the establishment of these allied countries that were going to serve as a buffer between you and the nation that you didn't like so much. And everybody should know at this point that the Cold War was a war between the Soviet Union and the United States primarily, and it was a Cold War because um, after 1945, and we'll talk about it when we talk about the Pacific Theater, after 1945, with the invention of atomic weapons, the Soviet Union and the United States simply couldn't fight a hot war because that would have meant, annihilation of, humanity or whatever. So what the Cold War turned out to be was kind of this, 50-year battle between the Soviet Union and the United States, where they fought these little proxy wars in places like Korea and Vietnam and Cuba and Nicaragua and uh, you know third world countries that would eventually kind of be like chess pieces where the United States wanted to sway every third world country to be becoming an ally of the United States, and the Soviets wanted to sway all these third world countries into becoming an ally of the Soviet Union. The last thing I'm going to say about the Cold War for now was that a lot of the problems in the world today, from the Middle East to Southeast Asia to China and the Koreas and whatnot, kind of had their roots in this Cold War battle where they were trying to shape countries to be allies. And I guess the one last thing I'm going to say is that the term third world refers to the countries that did not naturally ally themselves with the United States or the Soviet Union. So there was, the U.S. world, the Soviet world, and then the third world. And so the third world was kind of the playing ground for most of the Cold War. Okay, so I've said enough. I'm going to take a little break here, and then we'll talk about Dresden and the